Welcome to the Breakthrough Success Podcast, helping you achieve that breakthrough you've always been looking for in your business. And now your host, Mark Guberti. Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Mark Guberti, and this is the podcast for marketers and small business owners who are looking for the breakthrough for their businesses. I'm very excited about this show. We are going to discuss generating passive income from a podcast with our guest, Mark Podolsky. Mark is the host of multiple podcasts. In addition to hosting these podcasts, Mark is also a real estate investing expert, serial entrepreneur, digital marketing expert, and real estate business coach. And now it is my pleasure to welcome him to the show. Thanks for stopping by.
Mark, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Great intro. I love it.
Thank you. You always got to start strong with these types of things. It really sets the pace for how the whole interview is going to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I like to ask everyone who comes on my show in the beginning is I like to start with why. So in particular, I'm asking you what exactly got you started with a podcast? I mean, you're doing real estate, but why did you decide to then go into podcasting?
You know, it's interesting. I'm really just interested, and I've always been interested, even as a kid, in other people's stories. And it was sort of a selfish endeavor for me. I didn't have any real business reason or, any kind of ulterior motive to start the podcast, other than I thought it'd be fun to have a podcast. So, and kind of talk about what I was doing with a buddy of mine, Duran, who's a really fun guy. So we started the Land Geek podcast, and 100 episodes later, we really took it to the next level with the Best Passive Income Model podcast by starting to interview other experts from all other types of fields. And then I added another friend of mine, Scott Todd, for the third podcast, the Art of Passive Income podcast. And we're still doing the same thing, but it's just a different format. So for me, it's selfishly, I get to talk about things I like to talk about and interview people that I find endlessly interesting, and then draw out from them all these little things that, I would never be able to get if I didn't have the podcast. It's like mentorship for me, every week. And it's phenomenal.
I cannot agree with you anymore about that whole idea of getting free mentorship with the podcast. That's one of the things I really noticed when I started doing my podcast. And you mentioned that you started 3 and that you have someone else working along your side for 2 of them. I'm wondering how that goes. Like, do you create one episode for that podcast and then the other person creates the other episode? Is it like you do the episodes and the other person does the editing? How do you split the responsibilities when you're co-hosting a podcast? Or do you just go in the same episode together?
Yeah, so we just go in the same episode together. We have a team member booking our guests. And then when they book, we have a shared calendar. And then we use Zoom to record our podcasts. And we just jump on together and record it. And it gets recorded in the cloud. It's been really solid. And it's a very simple process. We don't get fancy with any kind of editing. I like to keep things really raw. So after the podcast is done, then our team just adds the intro and outro and uploads it into Libsyn. I mean, technically speaking, it couldn't be simpler.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a very simple outlook. I mean, you do provide a lot of value within the episodes. I think that you need to obviously have good audio and all of that stuff, but when people leave the episode, they're thinking more about the takeaways that they got from it. I mean, if there's like really bad audio, they'll notice that, but if you have all that stuff done pretty good and you're providing intense value, I feel like people are going to notice that a lot more and remember you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I don't get hung up on perfection, and it's really about, hey, number one, this isn't annoying, and number 2, we're giving good value. If it's good enough, and we're not annoying people with any kind of quality issues, then let's ship, right? Like I know Seth Godin was on your podcast. I love that guy. He ships. It's good enough.
So when you started shipping out your first few podcast episodes, and in particular that very first episode when at this point you're just doing it for fun, I'm not sure if you're thinking about income at all, but what exactly were you thinking the moment you published your first podcast episode?
I don't even remember. It was so long ago, honestly. But when I go back and I listen to the old episodes, I'm horrible. There's no energy. I'm totally flat. It's cringeworthy to listen to, and so I think I was really just kind of going by like, look, good enough, right? Like, better to have something out there than nothing, and suck and embrace the suck. And just kind of, have that faith that I'll eventually get better. And probably by podcast 20, you can notice a big difference. Like it's way better than the first, series of podcasts. But I think when I got that first bit of positive reinforcement from somebody listening to it, and they're like, love the podcast. I'm like, really? Like, oh, I think that was like a drug to me. I'm like, okay, I'll keep doing it.
I feel like the people listening to this podcast and all of our audiences, they have such a huge impact on our work, I feel like. And I feel like the audiences need to be, they need to know the type of impact that they have. Like anytime someone thanks me for something really simple, I'll make it a point to say like, thank you for sending this email, taking the time to do it. And it's just, I appreciate my audience. I know you appreciate your audience, and all these influencers, they appreciate their audiences who help them become successful. Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. It's all about that gratitude and appreciation, and it really helps kind of fuel your why and that purpose and that passion for waking up every day and trying to make an impact on someone else's life.
So you mentioned that the positive reinforcement you got earlier was critical. It helped you a lot on your podcasting journey. And I'm going to guess that in between when you published that first episode and when you got that first big reinforcement, there was a low point in your journey because all entrepreneurs have them. So I'm asking you, what was your low point within your journey?
I think the low point for me was looking at the numbers and seeing how few downloads we were getting and thinking to myself, there is literally like 20 people listening to this damn thing. Is it really worth my time? Because, you got to remember, I'm running two businesses at this point, right? And podcasting is just for fun. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, gosh, all these other people are doing, really well, and I kind of suck. And then thinking to myself, well, all right, well, if I had 20 people in a room listening to me and liking what I have to say, would that be enough? And I thought, yeah, if I had 20 people in a room, that'd be amazing. So it kind of got me through that dip, if you will. But I remember thinking like, gosh, I'm kind of just talking to myself and there's no audience. And then once I kind of got over the fact, like, okay, this is enough. And even if it's just one person, well, it'd be like having coffee with a friend. And if they're getting value out of it, worth it. So now we have, thousands of daily downloads. But when the beginning, it was like, I can't look at the numbers.
I feel like a lot of people fall into your similar situation where some people even now who they're getting big numbers, they'll look, why am I not growing? Or like there'll be people in the beginning who look and see like they're not getting many visitors and they're feeling really discouraged by seeing those statistics. I feel like we could get so obsessed with our statistics. So what was the big source of motivation that not only helped you like not get bogged down by your initial statistics, but more specifically allows you to power through even though you were just getting a few people? Like, was it the fact that you knew you were providing a lot of value, or was there something deeper?
I think it was providing value, and I think just the fact that we were getting some positive reinforcement was just enough, and that I was just really enjoying myself, and kind of using the podcast in a creative way. where I wasn't kind of using those creative juices before. And it was just kind of fun. I really just enjoyed it. And once I kind of let go of having any kind of results with it and just selfishly enjoying it, and then it really kind of blew up from there.
So I understand as a host myself that one of the important things you have to do is land the right people and get people who are going to provide more value to your podcast and create an enjoyable experience for your listeners. But I know, like, for you and me, it's easier to get guests on our show because we have more credibility. But for the podcast owners who are just getting started out and they don't have a lot of credibility, they're just getting started, what advice do you have for them so that they can get high quality guests on their episodes?
I think go on Amazon and see who's ready to pre-launch a book, right? Because authors need to start marketing their book, and they don't care. Like, they'll take any audience at that point, right? Like, they're in that they're like in that mode, and they're in PR mode. They're running hard, and if they can get some audience, and you're saying, "Hey, look, I'll provide you whatever," they'll do it, right? And then from there, they probably have 50, 100 times the audience you have, and they say, "Hey, Mark Gabarity, I was on his podcast. Check it out. He was asking me about the book," to his own list, right? And now all these people start listening to you. Like, "Oh, that was a pretty good interview. I'll listen to Mark's next interview," because he's getting my people on the podcast, and it kind of can grow from there. So that's like a quick hack.
I love the idea of getting authors who are just about to launch their books. I immediately see the idea behind it, but how do you find these authors? I know go to Amazon, but is there like a specific way to search to figure out which books are on pre-order and only the ones on pre-order?
I assume there is, because we're doing it, but I outsource that piece. So I couldn't tell you the technical way that I actually do it, because I don't do it.
That's understandable. I mean, I know that in business, you've really got to outsource a lot of stuff in order to actually find time to do what you truly enjoy. But I also know that to continue the outsourcing, you have to make revenue. And I know it would be harder for you to outsource that if your podcast wasn't making as much money, but you're generating some revenue from your podcast. And I was wondering, how exactly do you generate this passive income from your podcast?
So the podcast in and of itself does not generate any revenue. What we use the podcast for is as a marketing tool, because podcasting in and of itself is so intimate. Listening to my voice, I start earning, and by giving out so much value from the podcast, I start earning my listeners' trust, and I start getting more and more credibility as they start listening to more and more podcasts. And eventually, our call to action is go to thelandgeek.com and learn even more about our business model. So they go through our funnel after going through the podcast. We've got a warmer lead instead of a cold lead. And then from there, then they end up investing in one of our products. And that's how we generate that passive income.
So I understand leveraging the podcast as a marketing tool to build rapport between you and your audience. But in order to build that audience and develop that relationship, there's some knowledge you need to know about how to market a podcast. So what is your approach when it comes to marketing your podcast? Because I look at iTunes, I see your podcasts are performing very well. How can other podcast owners match those results or possibly exceed them?
So, we have a whole system as far as marketing, right? And basically we'll leverage technology, and we'll use, something called Meet Edgar. And then as soon as a podcast is published, right, we will use Meet Edgar, we'll use Libsyn, and we'll get it on all the social media platforms. We'll take the podcast and we'll repurpose it. We'll transcribe it. And now we've got a Medium post, right? We'll put it on our website as a blog post. We'll send it to the person that we did the interview with and ask them to share it with their audience. So between the leverage of all these social networks and our own audience, and then the someone else's audience, it starts to build momentum from there. But we don't do, you could do paid ads in Facebook to it, but we don't.
So you have this whole system in place and it's working really nicely for you. I've heard a lot about Meet Edgar. I'll definitely have to check that out. But I know that with all these different tactics out there and all these do's and don'ts, I know that there are several mistakes that people can make when it comes to marketing their podcasts. What do you think is the biggest mistake that people make when they are trying to promote their podcasts?
The biggest mistake people make when trying to promote their podcast. I don't know.
I guess it just depends on each situation.
I don't know how you can make a mistake marketing your podcast. I would say the only way you could make a mistake is not marketing your podcast. Because the problem with marketing is nobody knows anything, right? That's why it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, is that things are constantly changing. You know, everybody's seeking novelty. So what worked today in marketing won't work most likely tomorrow, right? So how can you make a mistake in marketing? I guess the only way to make a mistake is not to market and then not to measure and see where your Pareto principle is in place, right? The 80-20 rule, because 20% of your marketing efforts is going to yield 80% of that traffic. So then you need to discover, well, where are my people really coming from? Who am I connecting with and where? And then go all in there and start, look, if no one's coming to you from Pinterest, stop marketing in Pinterest. If no one's coming to you from Instagram, stop marketing Instagram. If everyone's coming to you from Snapchat, put more effort in Snapchat, right? So I would say that the only real mistake in marketing is not marketing.
I definitely see that marketing is just a learning tool and you can only get really good by continuing to learn, but you definitely want to make sure you're keeping an eye on the results and what you're getting so you can make better decisions regarding that. And I know that a lot of podcasts that are really successful, they're leveraging all this marketing. I mean, they're doing like crazy promotions, like they're doing promotions, as you have mentioned. Some of them are doing Facebook ads, some of them aren't. But the point is, a lot of these podcasts are doing all these different types of marketing strategies. So what do you think is a critical factor that you see in all successful podcasts?
Know your audience. Know what that message needs to be for that audience, and then deliver that value to them. Right? If your audience wants to hear about automation, or if your audience wants to hear about passive income, or if your audience wants to hear about marketing tactics, and you start talking about sports, right? You've just lost your audience. You just lost credibility with them. Stay on message. I think that's really important.
I agree. Knowing your audience is definitely really important because valuable content, the way I've always seen it, it's not just like writing good content. It's about writing content that your audience wants more of. So like content on like playing the piano would be valuable to me because I like playing the piano, but I'm not sure how much of a value it would be to my listeners, or I'm not sure if you play the piano. So basically, value is different and it all depends on the person. But if you're just getting started out, how do you recommend identifying your audience?
If you're just starting out, how do you recommend identifying your audience? I don't know. Start asking questions. I mean, I would, I wouldn't sort of bifurcate podcasting from an actual, let's say, business, right? So you don't want to start with why am I podcasting? Number one, right? What's the purpose of it? Is it, because I want to use it for marketing? Do I really want to, monetize this podcast? Do I want to start getting advertisers, like FreshBooks, and start using it for, revenue? I'd start like, what's my end goal with this podcast? And then I would start asking a bunch of people, well, what do you want to hear? Right? Because you don't want to be the next whatever, right? You want to be unique. You want to find an angle or a niche that's underserved and start serving that audience. And then you'll discover you either love your audience or you hate them, right? And if you hate your audience, then go find a different audience. But I think that's probably the best place to start. What do you think, Mark?
I think it's great to just produce content based on what you want and then see what audience comes to you. My opinion regarding that is, like, for instance, me, I just posted social media advice, not knowing how many people in my audience would be interested in social media. But if you hone in on one specific topic, you're going to, like, you have this whole audience of people with different interests. Some of the people are just going to leave your audience because they're not interested in my case, social media, and others are going to stick around. And I feel like if you create content and do podcast episodes that match the type of audience you want to develop, you want to build, then that's going to help you build that audience.
I like it.
Thank you. So I know that you've learned a lot of things on your podcasting journey and your entrepreneurial journey as a whole. So I'm wondering, out of everything you've learned, what is the best lesson that you have learned on your journey?
Stay humble and keep asking questions and keep learning and keep growing. And I think people are either camping or climbing in life. And there's nothing, you can't constantly climb, right? At some point you do need to camp and you do need to assess where you're at and where you want to go. But I think you need to understand where you're at and fully embrace that as well. So the entrepreneurial journey has a lot of ups and has a lot of downs, and nobody knows everything. And certainly, keep asking questions, keep going to, mentors like a Mark Guberti, and keep learning more, because you might as well stand on the shoulders of giants, let them make those mistakes so you don't have to, and smart cut the whole damn thing if you can.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of people have already completed the same journey that you are on. So you're definitely going to make a lot of shortcuts when it comes to you accomplishing the goals that you are trying to achieve. So speaking of goals and our desire to accomplish those goals, I like to ask all of my guests for an awesome inspirational quote that they can think of. And the idea behind this is I want people to leave these episodes motivated and empowered so that they are more charged to accomplish their goals. So I ask you, Mark, what is one awesome inspirational quote you can think of right now?
Well, I'm a big Zig Ziglar fan. And if you don't know who Zig Ziglar is, go ahead and Google him. Older guy, he's passed away now, but great motivational speaker and sales trainer, like the grandfather to, like, let's just say Tony Robbins or Seth Godin, right? And one of his quotes that I love is, if you'll do for the next 3 to 5 years what other people won't do, if you'll do for the next 3 to 5 years what other people won't do, you'll be able to do for the rest of your life what other people can't do. I love that quote.
I love it too. I'm just hearing it right now. And I mean, I feel like inspirational quotes, like some people think, oh, it's just like another inspirational quote saying the same thing. But I feel like each of these has like a different impact. That one had a really strong impact on me.
Great. Zig Ziglar, man.
Yeah, I've read a lot of like motivational quotes that he said, and I think it's some really great stuff. Mark, I want to thank you for taking the time to be on my podcast. And before you leave, I just want all of my listeners to know where they can find you on the web?
Yeah, I think the best place to go is thelandgeek.com. They can download for free our passive income blueprint. They can get the ebook, How to Avoid the 3 Fatal Land Buying Mistakes. And then they start getting the podcast delivered each week to their email inbox. We have a lot of fun. We got a fun messenger bot now. So, they can check that out too. But the best place to go is thelandgeek.com.
All those links will be in the show notes. Mark, it was such a great pleasure to have you on my podcast. Keep the Mark name strong. Awesome name. And I look forward to continuing to stay in touch.
Mark Guberti, thanks so much. I appreciate you.
My pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed that interview. I believe that everyone's looking for more ways to generate passive income, and Mark is living that dream with his podcast and real estate success. It was such a pleasure to have the Land Geek on our show. If you forgot to take notes, then don't worry. We've got you covered with the show notes. Visit markguberti.com/E28 for those. You can ask your questions over there, which I'll be more than happy to answer. To never miss an episode, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever player you are using. If you are a regular listener and haven't done so already, I would greatly appreciate it if you could give this podcast a review or a rating. 2 ways you could do this are through markguberti.com/iTunes or markguberti.com/Stitcher. That ends this episode. Don't forget, dream big, achieve greatness, and unlock your potential today. How does over 100 retweets per day sound to you? My free ebook, 27 Ways to Get More Retweets on Twitter, has you covered. I use the methods within this ebook to get over 10,000 retweets every single quarter. To learn more and get access to this free resource, visit markguberti.com/retweet. This podcast is a production done by Mark Guberti. For more insights, head on over to markguberti.com.